Welcome back. Joining us now for the Democratic response to the governor's budget message are two men who have had a lot of experience dealing with the state budgetary process. First, we have Senator Laurence Weiss. Senator Weiss is the chairman of the Senate Revenue, Finance, and Appropriations Committee, and he lives in Perth Amboy. Sitting next to Senator Weiss is Assemblyman John Watson. Assemblyman Watson is the ranking Democrat on the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and he is from Trenton. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. First of all, I'd just like to get your overall reaction to the governor's budget message. Senator Weiss, I guess this is going to be your 9th budget that you have presided over, or been part of anyway.
That's right, Larry, and first let me thank you for the opportunity of being here tonight. And my comments on the governor's budget is that run to the point where I commend him really for recommending a budget that better reflects the state government's real economic condition, slow revenue growth, and so on. However, this low growth budget follows two budgets which grew to 24%. This budget proposal does not surprise me. Past spending practices have led us to this point. The governor indicated today that New Jersey has a great future, and I agree with that. However, I'm not as optimistic as the governor, and I'm very concerned about what Act 2 is.
All right, Assemblyman Watson.
Thanks, Larry, for having us here this afternoon. I thought that the governor's speech was pretty good today. In going over the speech yesterday, I felt a little devastated. But today, it was a little more in the upbeat. But I do think, 24 hours makes a lot of difference now. Yesterday, we were talking about a lot of things that was very distressing. Today, it looks like we have some hope in some of the things that he was talking about. I think, as Senator Weiss is saying, that yes, I look for our budget to be a pretty tight budget this year, and it's not going to be as it was in the years before. We're going to have to take a real good look at that budget to see where we can do some things with it. And I know, too, that the senator and our side of the aisle over the years, especially the Senate, we've made some very good cuts in years when things were good. So now we know things are bad, and we're going to take a look at our priorities. And I think our priorities is a little different than the others, and we're going to make sure that we're there monitoring what's going to happen this year in the budget.
Let me ask you, you're both from cities here in New Jersey, Trenton, Perth Amboy. The governor today proposed a stable source of funding, as he called it, to give back the nearly $70 million anyway that was taken out of the Aid to the Cities program this year. What's your reaction to that, to the governor's plan?
Well, if you listen very carefully, Larry, to the governor, and I know you did, so did I, that much of that is predicated on the demise or repeal of the Ford bill. If he could do that, he might have a successful drive toward other property tax relief, and that's, I suppose, is the basis of what we're looking for. He also proposed a liquor tax, and he used some analogy with a glass of milk being taxed and liquor not. That may be some justification, but I'd like to get a look at the bill doing that prior to indicating my feeling for it one way or the other. Down here, usually is what you see is not what you may get in the end, so you better take a look at it. The rest of the budget that the governor talked about today drives along the area of how much of the budget really is already spoken for. And I think that the governor indicated that 58% is already gone to local and county governments, 20% is fixed, that's 78% of the budget, and 22% is all he has to play with. I understand that, and that's something that I've been trying to put out here for a long time. Is you can't have all these funds come in, you're dedicated to something, and then try to operate state government. I think the governor finds that a problem in allocating all these funds out. And this budget was actually not cut as a budget. I think there's like 89, John, or maybe $90 million that he cut out of old money. But all of the major cuts in the budget are from the raises that were requested this year. And his recommendation is a lot lower. So they cut the budget, $283 million. But in a budget of this size, that amount is infinitesimal. And we've cut that budget before. So one night, I think you were there, we cut that budget $272 million, and I thought the State House was going to collapse on some other things. But those things have yet to come, and come June, we'll know better about further cuts on this thing.
Assemblyman Watson?
Well,
Particularly on the aids to the city, since you're from Trenton.
yeah, I would just like to make some points here in regards to the repeal first. Realistically, we're talking about repealing the Ford Act. I think we have a lot of support on our side of the aisle for that. But in our house, Larry, I think it would be very difficult. Before, we were trying to do things in regards to the repeal of Ford. We then negotiated and came up with a modification of the Ford Act that would have allowed us to raise maybe $30 or $40 million extra in capping the Ford Act and making sure that the distribution was a fair distribution for the people of this state. The way the Ford Act is set up now, the wealthy gets the biggest chunk, and the poor cities are still suffering, and they're not getting their fair share. So there's not a fair and equitable distribution of the funds. So I don't see the other side of my aisle being...
You're talking about the Republicans.
Republicans being very happy about repealing this Ford Act in a year that they're all up for election. I don't see that. So, as I said before, we're going to have to take a good look at the budget in other ways, because this seems to be to us. It's saying, well, we're hopeful in trying to bring this about, but I just don't see that, and I think we have to talk about other things. You take the liquor tax. I'm not too sure about the support for the liquor tax. Of course, everyone is talking about no new taxes, and then we come up with a new twist here, and here we got the liquor tax. I'd like to take a look at that before making any decisions or judgments on that. And we have to see how our side of the aisle feel about a liquor tax. So there's another. I think we got a fighting both ways on this. You got a pro and con here. You got pro with a lot of us in regards to the Ford Act, and you got the other side saying, hey, no, this is not going to happen here. Really, the governor has given us some inspiration here today. When you talk about taking over state welfare, county welfare, that's $110 million relief for the counties. You're talking about the county courts, $145 million. But you must remember that we already had $18 million that was put aside for the first phasing of the county courts, and that was lapsed this year. So that's a burden on the municipalities that we're talking about. Distressed cities, of course, he said he's going to put $65 million back into the distressed cities. That's $135 million. Yesterday we were feeling pretty sick about the cuts in the distressed cities, because it was only $70 million there. It was $120 million last, and he took 50 away. Today, he's going to add 65, which gives us some hope there. But now, you look at the other side of it. He underfunded the education by $262 million. On top of that, the revenue sharing was $50 million taken away from us. I just want to make a point here. $18 million took back from the lapse. You had $18 million with the corporate banking tax that was distributed among the municipalities, taken away. A skim of $122 million in gross receipt. And On top of that, they took away $13 million of county college funding. So all of this is borne by the people. Either that's a half $1 billion in underfunding and skimming. Either we raise taxes property taxes on our local people, or cut programs. That's the only way. Now, when you talk about new taxes, Larry, what the point I'm trying to make, it may not be new state tax, but it's taxes that we're going to have to raise in regards to bringing in the money that's needed to continue the programs or to either cut out some of our programs.
Unfortunately, John, this is all predicated on moves by the legislature. I heard the governor say today, repeal the Ford Act, all right? And he says, and I understood him to say, and maybe not so many words, I'm for repealing it, okay? Now, we come to an impasse. The indication given by you about the Assembly is that it's going to be difficult to pass. I cannot at this point assess what the Senate is going to do, but given my druthers, I'd rather see the Ford Act abolished, repealed, gotten rid of. There are many things in that Ford bill that are inequitable, and I think you already indicated that. But it all comes back to that. If you don't do that, there's no sense going to step number 2, on the liquor tax. And if we don't do that, and step number 2, all the goodies that you and I are talking about, or not goodies, but the necessary things for districts like yours and mine are out the window. So there has to be some pressure put on those legislators who are somewhat hesitant to do, on a quote unquote, the right thing for the state of New Jersey. And I think we're at that point now, because there's only a 5% revenue growth in that budget. He has a 4% inflation factor. That reduces the 5% to basically 1%. There isn't much movement in that. And I think the state needs about 7.5% revenue growth just to keep current programs viable. And therein lies the problem.
In an election year, is it politically realistic, though, to think that the Ford Act is going to be repealed? And then if you don't do that, as you said, Senator, then what's the sense of going on with some of these other points? And if that happens, then aren't you left with taking an axe or a knife or whatever to what's in the budget now if you want to fully fund the cities or fully fund education?
You qualified it by saying in an election year. That's a tough one to get around, and I agree. But I think at the level of funding in this state now, or budget level, where someone has to make a move, election year notwithstanding. If there are people out there that are municipalities out there where taxes are so high that your constituents are in trouble, you're bound to vote for something like this election year or not, because there's a downside to not voting for something like this also. It's a two-way street, and we can't have it both ways, unfortunately. We either have the money in its proper form and proper place, or we leave it where it is now and just take care of a relatively small segment of our constituencies, and perhaps not even the right one. So certainly, I sound like an advocate for repealing it, and I really am. But I think that is going to help. The governor says he wants to fund courts and for $145 million, as John indicated, or welfare for $110 million. And there was a third item, I'll just stress cities. Well, he wants to do that. He says he wants to do it. And I think that he ought to be given that opportunity to do it. It's important to more people that he does it than he does not. It's probably the mainstay of this budget right now. This is not the same speech I read last night in the Taxpayers Guide. He turned it around, and he's willing to do these things. I think that we ought to challenge the governor by giving him the bill, by with a majority vote in both houses, and say, okay, you said you're going to do it. Hey, let's do it. We're with you. I, for one, am with him. This is just one puzzle. The one thing I'd just like to see is on our liquor tax, because I don't know what's in it, haven't seen it. But as far as the Ford bill is concerned, right at the moment, I'm ready to vote to reallocate that bill in some manner that is best for the whole state,
Larry, it was
including
one thing.
John's district.
Yeah, but it was one major thing that he could have done for distressed cities is to add to the county welfare, municipal welfare. Municipal welfare, Larry, you take the Camdens and the Trentons and Newarks, of course, you know. The Camden would probably gain about $7 million. Newark, another $10 million. I know my city would gain $3 or $4 million out of that package. So when you're talking about taking and making some relief as far as the property tax owners here in the state, you're beginning to, this is a great package. But when you want to do a little more for those cities that we feel is ready to bring their charters in and give them to the governor and say, you run the cities, I think municipal welfare would help a lot along the lines of the
Well,
proposal.
it probably would, John, but I'm really not sure. I think you're talking about reallocating current funds in the budget now without the Ford Act. Am I reading you correctly?
No. Yeah, Larry, I said before that interesting enough, if you give us enough back for real property tax relief, if you're talking about county welfare takeover, you're talking about municipal welfare takeover, you're talking about the courts, you're talking a nice package here. We got to make sure, that those things, as you said, if we don't get the first one, no sense in going for the second. Well, you're absolutely right, and I know that we have a lot of support on our side of the aisle for the repeal. But the repeal, if it's going to take in the kind of things that we're doing here, then it makes a lot of sense because we're talking about at least halfway decent property tax relief for the people. And that's the main thing that I'm looking for.
I misunderstood what you said before. But what you're actually saying is to get it up on a board list so you can vote on it.
Well, what I'm saying is, give us a shot at first making sure that we have this, pot here ready to be funded, and give us the idea of what they're really going to do with this money. We can repeal all we want. I've been around here long enough to see some things happen that when it comes time to put the monies where your mouth is, it's directed somewhere else. So
Don't be a skeptic,
I want to make
John.
sure. I want to make sure that it's going to happen.
Let me ask Senator Weiss this question. The rainy day fund was really your baby. You pushed for that for years.
Try 7.
Yeah. Okay, 7 years. And you got it. And now a year later after you got it, you want to spend it all. Is that what you had in mind?
That was the general purpose, and keeping it for a day when we'll need it, when funds would not be sufficient enough to run government the way we feel and the governor.
Did you expect that rainy day to happen so soon? And do you think all of the money should be spent in this budget?
Basically, yeah, in a roundabout way, perhaps I did. Because I've been indicating all along that come the end of this year, we're going to be like $500 million in deficit. We're not too far from that. And if we didn't have that rainy day fund, the current surplus would not be there, because obviously he took the surplus from the rainy day fund from one side of the ledger and moved it on to the other side of the ledger into the general fund. That probably saved the day, and that was a good feature about it. And I can't be too put out about that. The problem with the rainy day fund is that no one paid too much attention to it for 7 years, and you couldn't get the thing moving. And it was with the kindness of the governor, really, last year that he put that money aside. I thought it was a good move. The Assembly still has it, perhaps on second reading, and maybe it's going to die there at this point. Are we going to have enough money to put into it for next year, for another rainy day, for a year down the road? I don't think so, because I'm anticipating that by fiscal year 91, which is a year from now, that we're going to have that $750 million deficit. Unless we change our operation here and look more closely at our budgets and not spend like we have to spend every dollar that comes in. The state's kind of leveled off. The governor said today, everybody in this state's working. And I agree with him. Everybody, except for one thing, everybody in this state that wants to work is working. Okay? So that brings you up to a plateau. Now, all those people are going to work all through next year, right? But they're going to pay the same amount of income tax, so that's not going to affect the tax any. Meantime, the prices are going up, so your sales will probably go down. So there goes your sales tax on the downtrend. Corporation tax, as my understanding is in some trouble. I won't be able to address that really till about May the 15th, and April 15th being the income tax returns, and May the 15th the corporate, and so on. But projections indicate that that tax is going to be down. We had projections of 12% growth last year in our budget, revenue growth, but we are no more than halfway there at the moment. So we have to make up that about 5 or 6% left, between those two numbers. If we don't do it, then there are only two ways to do it. One is to cut the budget, or put on new taxes. And somewhere along the line, someone will have to recognize that this is the time of reason. Otherwise, we're going to go belly up.
Today, though, say not read my lips, but read my paper, and I'm not going to go for any income tax increase anyway.
Well, he qualified that, and he said not income tax. He didn't say anything else. But in the in the taxpayer's guide, I read where the governor said he asked for other taxes, like 5 cents on a gasoline tax, and he only got 2.5, and that would have saved $200 million, $50 million on some other tax. So I'm judging from there, if he already put in print that he's not, he's smarting because he didn't get them. But so that means to me that, hey, if you gave them to me or I would ask for them, he wouldn't be too angry to get them either. Something has to be done. Either now, voluntarily, or at some later date, involuntarily.
Well, how about some of those other taxes? Do you think there is the political support in either one of your houses to increase the gasoline tax another 2.5 cents, to maybe tax plastic containers?
Let me requalify that as you did before. In an election year, the only thing that's going to make that come about is a deficit budget. And everyone wants something for his district, wants something for his state. A zillion programs on there, as John Watson and I well know. And you want to do it for everyone, right? You don't want to withhold. But we're not in that position any longer. Whether you're in the Assembly or the Senate, it really doesn't make any difference. We're down to counting those last dollars. And I didn't start out as a skeptic, but I've kind of turned into one. But I'd like to see the state succeed. I'd like it to be, as the governor indicated, John. I really would. Optimistic, rosy, and everything else. But I've been through this thing a number of times with John Watson, and we've discussed this thing quite frequently. And I can't see the rosy picture that the governor is selling at this point.
Assemblyman Watson, what picture do you see?
Well, let me just reflect back a little bit on Larry. I was with Larry for those 7 years in putting a rainy day fund aside. And they were good years. Good years, Larry, after the first year.
We enjoy working on it.
Absolutely. If we had just put a little bit aside each year in those years, we'd be in pretty good shape today. But we were spending money like we were crazy. So now we're going to pay the price. I think what we're doing here, and believe me, I'm like the senator. I just hope that this state is in the shape it's in as the governor's state. I just feel that in October or November, when the governor said that the sales taxes were down, right away I thought about December, Christmas holidays.
Yeah.
And, of course, we year in and year out, we would get those dismal kind of revenue projections. And so my hope is that the corporate tax, the sales tax in the last 6 weeks have, indicated that we're not in that bad shape, Larry, and we have to live on a little hopes too. But in doing so, we have to be very serious about going into this budget book, item by item, in everything, including personnel, where they have all of these dollars set aside for new employees and lapsing them back into different.
You say you support a continuation of the hiring freeze beyond June 30th.
I would support a continuation of the hiring freeze in certain categories, because there are some categories we should not have to do without employees in the state. And I'm talking about in the health, the mental health, and in corrections and things like that. We can't. But when you talk about these high, middle level, and higher level jobs, and the executive, this new executive situation, I would support a freeze beyond. Yes.
Senator Weiss, same for you?
I don't have a problem with what John indicates. I think that it's about time, higher level jobs especially.
I'm going to give you, I just have to interrupt, excuse me. I have about a minute and a half, there's about 3 minutes left in the program
point,
here.
That's okay.
Well, maybe you can make it in your closing remarks here,
Okay.
but in next 6 months of deliberation, we're going to start in March, and you have to have a budget in place by midnight, June 30th. What are we going to have at the end of that period?
I'm not sure, Larry. I'm really not sure at this point. We have to go through that budget with the proverbial fine-tooth comb and just see what's in it and see how we can reallocate the money, if it's possible to reallocate. And I really can't tell you, but I'll be better able to tell you on May the 16th. But there's this other thing that bothers me. It has to do directly pretty much with what you're saying. There was $142 million in one-time non-recurring revenue that was transferred around in this budget. And that's the thing that bothers me about the whole thing. You know, we used to say with Byrne administration, smoke and mirrors, gimmickry, and so on. They increased the withholding tax, and they're bringing in $65 million extra with that, and the insurance premium tax, which is $77 million. So totally, they come $142 million. Now that's money that's already, you know, being collected in advance. Now I have a feeling that come next year we're going to have to make that good somehow. Okay. And when you start moving money in this amount around, you have to start thinking that maybe all is not well in Center City, and you know, better take another look.
So Tom Kean's, the person who comes after Tom Kean could be in for a rude surprise.
Well, that's what indicated to you before. It'd be somewhere between $500 and $750 million in deficit. And so far I've been very fortunate in my predictions. I don't like bad predictions, such as the one I'm going to make now. But if something isn't done, that's precisely what's going to happen.
All right, Assemblyman Watson, we have about a minute here. What's your prediction for the end of the budget process?
Well, as I listened to Senator Weiss, and knowing how he goes through the budget, knowing how I have, and over the years, I can agree with him and taking a look at some of the things that's beginning to shape up here. I think it's got to really have an upturn, Larry, in regards to some of our revenue projections to make us feel any different than what we're feeling here today. But I really believe that you take the one-shot deal, that the upfront money that you're getting in your insurance and your workers' compensation tax, those dollars will have to be made up next year, and that we're going to start off with a shortfall of $140-some million. So,
well, that's not too rosy an assessment, and I'm afraid on that note I do have to wrap us up. But we will be going to we will be covering both of your appropriations committees as time goes on, and we'll be watching to see how the budget process progresses and how the state ends up on midnight, June 30th.
We'll be happy to have you.
Thank you. Senator Weiss, Assemblyman Watson, thank you for
Larry.
being with us this evening. I'm Larry Stuelpnagel. Thank you for joining us.